All right, guys, so we are on to this part, which is we're going to start talking a little bit about the integration before we start despilling edges in a specific way. So something that's important is, so in our actual final shot, we're going to be scaling this guy up a little bit to make it look like he's kind of coming towards his camera, as if he's kind of swinging on some kind of rope and, maybe scaling a building. So something we need to think about is that if we're changing the scale of this person, so for example, if I disable this and enable it, we can see we're changing the position. But of course, that might actually change our despill, because that will change where the edges of this person are in relation to the background. So it's kind of a good idea to figure out the position of everything and what the background's going to look like before you start doing all your edge work, because this stuff might change. For example, if this edge is a little bit brighter, that's going to work for this highway. But if we look at the original position, maybe that same edge is over a dark building. So that's why we want to get the position correct first. So what I've done for you guys is I've just done a really basic animation. And you guys can copy it from scratch or do whatever. But basically, I've just scaled him down and moved his position. And I've set a keyframe at the start. And I've sort of set a keyframe at the end of him scaled up a little bit, so he kind of comes closer to the camera, like this. So yeah, it's about 3 keyframes. He kind of starts lower, he kind of goes a little bit higher, and then he comes a little bit bigger towards the camera. So if we basically watch that in motion, we can just get a feeling of what that's going to look like. And I'll show you guys something else right here that's really important as well. So the reason we're able to scale our character up as well is because, if you remember, our footage is 4K, but our final composite is going to be 2K, so half the resolution, which means that if we scale this picture up, we're actually not losing much quality, because we're starting with a higher resolution picture and we're going to a smaller resolution. So one thing I wanted to show you guys is, so after this key that we've done, so this is the key area. Let me just show you the diagram again. So if we go back to our diagram that I explained earlier, so we've basically done this area, the whole green area, and we'll probably have to go back and make little changes, but for the most part, this is in a pretty good place. So we're going to do the despill next, but we need to get our transformation in place first. So we just want to line this up with the background, figure out where everything is going, and then we'll do our edges. So that's kind of why this diagram is pretty helpful. Also, you can start to do a little bit of color grading just to figure out, just to get an idea at least of what your image is going to look like towards the end. And we'll do a little bit of this dynamic despill potentially if we need to, which I'll explain later on. So one other thing to note is that all of this despill, it's really the only rule you need to think is that these are color corrections. So they just need to go before the pre-multiply. So they could go before this copy node, or they could go after. So for example, you could take this whole portion and you could put it after this transformation process as well. So it's not super important where this section goes, as long as it's before the pre-multiply and some of these corrections here. And the reason I'm saying that is because if we're scaling our footage, some of these roto shapes, we don't want to have to animate them. So, for example, if we're scaling our footage up and and this roto shape is darkening the side of his head, let me just show you. So, for example, if we did the despill here, like if we did a despill correction before we've done this transformation. So the transformation is animated and it's moving his position. So again, it's the same kind of problem I just briefly mentioned. It's if we do a correction here, I'll do a roto paint. And maybe I go here and if I switch it to RGB and I'm doing our little paint trick. So I'm kind of painting here. It's working over this orange area. But if we disable that, maybe it wouldn't work in this spot. So basically, sometimes we're not doing the roto paint method. Maybe we're doing like a color correction method. So for example, a better example of what I was trying to explain let me just say something like this. So let me just disable this. So I'm going to disable our transformation for a moment. Let's say we want to brighten this edge or kind of get that color similar to the background color. So we would go here with our edge, easy edge, and we would shrink it down. And we would probably darken this a little bit. Let me just go to the final composite real quick. Okay, so basically we would expand this a little bit. We would kind of blur the inside, and then maybe we would try to grade that edge a little bit orange to try to get it similar to the background. And we could continue, we could make it a little bit darker, and then make the inside edge a little bit smaller. So I would really try to isolate it to the very edge and something like that. So that would be like a really quick version. And then what you could do is it's kind of fixing the white edge, but it's not fixing the, we don't want that darkness coming from it. So what you could do is put another grade, and you could slightly lift that edge to being the value of his hair. So something like this. And continue darkening. Okay, so you see we've kind of fixed the detail of that edge just using color corrections. We didn't use a edge extend or anything like that. So you see that's kind of working for this portion of the hair. But look, now if we enable our animation, it's first of all, it's adding a bit of motion blur. So that's changing how this despill is done, but it's changing the whole position. So this correction, it's not working because of this animation. So that's what I'm saying is some of the despilling you want to do, it depends if you have an animation like this or not. If you don't have this animation and we're just using the footage, which is the majority of the time, it's not all the time that you're, this is called a reposition or a repo. It's not all the time that you're changing the scale of your original footage. But if you are, it's just important to keep in mind that the background relative to your foreground is going to change your despill. So for example, I would reposition this and put these color corrections. I would do my work not before this reposition, but after. So that kind of changes our template a little bit because this whole section is placed here, but we would want to place it after the transformation. So just something to keep in mind. It might not be too big of an issue in some cases, but yeah, so I think in this comp, we'll actually probably put our despills after these two. Something else to keep in mind that I want to mention is if you notice, so we have our footage, which is 4K, and our project size and our final image is going to be 2K DCP. Is just the format name, but it's but one thing to notice is I've reformatted it and then I did the transformation. You see these two nodes are purple, so that means they concatenate together. And what that means is these two things are being treated as one. So basically Nuke is doing this whole movement or changing of the size of the picture in one swipe kind of. The problem is if you place something in between these nodes, you'll actually lose image quality. So really you want to stack your transformations together. So if you're changing the size of your footage and you're animating it, you don't want to put a node in between like this. So if you zoom into this footage and you put a node in between and I enable it, you'll see that even though this grade is doing nothing, we haven't changed anything, our image is actually getting blurrier. So if I go a little bit later on so we can see it better. So if I go later on, we look at his face, we zoom really close in, and I enable a grade node. You see that we're losing sharpness of this image, and that's because these transformations are not being treated as one, but two. And each time you do a transformation, you're kind of filtering your picture, which means it's just applying a slight movement to where the pixels are and trying to figure out where it is. And that's breaking this concatenation. So basically, long story short, for practical purposes, keep your transformations all in one thing. So if you have transformations, keep them together. And okay, so some of the other things we're going to talk about with this section, I'm not going to cover this scene parallax and reflection parallax. So I have a YouTube video actually that goes into these two concepts really in depth. So I'm going to link you guys this if you guys want to do this portion. But I'm going to provide it to you in your guys' script down here. And the reason I'm not covering it is because it's a pretty big tangent in relation to green screens and plate compositing. So I don't want to go off a complete tangent. But, of course, the information is available for you guys. So if you guys want to find that information, I've provided it. If we go to learning information, I think this one's a duplicate, but it's a PDF. It says YouTube links for parallax. If you open that file, there's 3 videos there that you can check out if you want to do this optional part of the class, which is adding parallax to this background scene. And basically what that means is it's just making this background feel more 3-dimensional than if you don't do this effect. So we're not just taking a 2D picture and putting our character over it. We're actually adding him over a background and adding some 3D motion to that scene. So if you can see, I'm letting it cache here, but if you look at these buildings here, they move a little bit quicker versus back here. So we're actually adding this fake 3D look to our scene. And there's a whole technique about how you can do that I've kind of come up with and put a YouTube video out there for. So you can go check that out if you want. One thing I didn't cover in the YouTube video, I will cover here though, which is we did a fake rack focus. So something with our final shot is our character is going to be kind of swinging to the frame. And basically what I'm trying to mimic here is that the camera is shifting focus from a little bit back here to a little bit closer to our character. So at the start frame, frame 38, we see it's about this level of focus. At the end, we see it's much more out of focus. So those shapes in the background you see there become a little bit more out of focus as we are progressing through the shot. So our camera's kind of locked focus on this character that we're kind of mimicking that he might be coming towards the camera. Now, something with camera focus, though, is that it doesn't, camera focus doesn't, for example, if I do a defocus node, and I just plug it into the background, and I just start increasing the defocus, this is sort of incorrect because, well, it is incorrect because a camera defocus works on the distance of objects to your camera. So what you really want to do is defocus the objects that are much further away more, and then objects that are closer less. So this is a 2D image. We don't have a depth map for this picture, but what you could do, and what I did, is you can create a roto shape, which I've done here, and I've basically made a square and feathered it really strongly towards the camera. And basically you can copy that. So you copy the alpha into the depth Z channel, and you create a Z defocus node after that. We plug that in, and if I let it take a second here, so we've copied the alpha from a roto into the depth Z channel, and then this Z defocus, it looks for the depth in that channel. So it says depth channel is depth.z, and what you want to do is set the math to far equals 1. So basically, it means that wherever the color is 1, that's how the camera thinks that is far away. And wherever it's black, meaning 0, that's closer to us. So we're just giving Nuke an idea about the distance of this picture. So if I enable and disable, you see that the background gets blurrier than the foreground. The foreground's still getting blurry, but it's a little bit less. So if I just adjust this roto, just push it back to show you. If I push it back all the way, you see how this is sharp, but it's really out of focus back there. So it's just a really big blurry shape. That's all it is. And one thing you can do as well is switch that filter type to bladed, and that might just give you a little bit more of a star shape, which I think is a little bit more interesting than a circle. But that's just personal preference. So that's just something pretty cool to have in our shot. So that I've added for you guys in here. If you want to recreate what I've just done there, you can just, delete that portion, redo it so you can learn the concept. I really believe in learning by doing. So if you guys want to remember things better, I think it's, at least for me, the way my memory works is if I just watch something, I'll probably forget it. But going through the process and actually doing it, you're going to have that information stick. So I would just go through and do that if I were you. These reflection parallax, definitely, these are more advanced technique, sort of. But that's what those YouTube videos are for, if you guys want to take the extra step there and learn that as well. So, okay, so I've just talked about a bunch of stuff. How we get our character into position with the transformations first, and where we're going to potentially place D-Spill, and we'll see how it works in the end, where we place things, but we know that it's going to be before this pre-multiply here. So, yeah, this is the way I'm usually compositing, but if you want to get a really cheap composite to start to just get a feel for things, you could do an edge push. So this is the node I gave you guys, which you can find, of course, at the top of the script under assets. So I also added the animation thing here, so you can add that to your script. You're going to be missing the animation, so you're going to need to add these two nodes to your composite, reformat and animation. So you guys will go down here and you'll place them in the right spot. But one thing we can do is just put this edge push here as a really cheap, quick way to get an idea a little bit of what this is going to start to look like without all the bad edges. So we can just put that here as a temporary solution, and just to, we still have obvious problems, but it's just to start to figure out what our comp is going to look like. One thing I also did was, and we'll go over this probably a little bit at the end once we get more into the integration. I also did the ZD focus on this layer as well. So I kind of had him a little bit more out of focus at the start and more in focus at the end. So that's just a really simple keyframe on the size of a ZD focus. But I'll go over this, I think, again, probably at the end there. So yeah, this is kind of give us a little bit of an idea of what the comp will look like. I've also done some really quick color corrections, which we'll redo and do it better when we get to integration class. But something that's wrong with this shot that you guys are going to notice is, his head is sort of lifted, meaning the blacks of his head are really lifted, and that's because of the light from our original plate. So if we look at the original plate, we have this light that's actually, if we gain up here, we see that the darkest values of this part of the image are much lighter than, like, for example, down on the coat. And part of that is due to the fact that this light is casting a giant glow. So you can actually see it really clearly over here. So you see how the black is, it's almost gray compared to down here. And that's coming from a glow that's happening in the lens. So when we do our final composite, we don't have this giant light behind our character. So we're going to need to counteract that lifting that's happening, lifting of the blacks. So if we go back to normal exposure, what we would do is we would do a roto shape, like a really rough one I just did, and I just basically pushed that down. I basically just taken the black point and shoved it down a little bit. And we're going to have to do more on the edges. Like I said, that's a really temporary edge. We'll have to do something better. But just to get a really base idea of where we're going with this whole thing. And then I did a little bit of a saturation to desaturate this. It's quite saturated, just to get a simple idea. So now that we hit play on this, this is like this would be what would be called like a slap comp. Which is, or a bash comp, some studios call it. Some studios call it bash comp or slap comp. It just means like a very rough version of where the composite is going to go, just to get a concept going. And that's a good practice to do, just to, make sure you're working in the right direction before you do a ton of work without even realizing what it's going to look like. So that's sort of what we have for like a bash comp. And yeah, that's pretty much it for this particular thing. So let me just pull open here. I think I had this open. So this is the video I was mentioning earlier. So I have that linked, and I recommend you guys go check it out. and we'll move on to some other portions of starting to dig in and get these edges fixed and do things the proper way. Some of the other things I was playing around with here, which we'll get into later, is some lens flares. So we can actually generate some lens flares based off of our brights of the background. So we'll start to get into lens flares and things that we can make this look more interesting in the end. But that's going to come more once we've gone through the nitty gritty of doing this whole despill. And it will take us a bit of time, probably about as long as it took this keying. So depending on your preferences and how you're trying to learn this, you can follow I'm trying to record mostly all the work I'm doing, even though I've pretty much already taught the concepts. So pretty much what I taught here are the main concepts, but now I'm just going to be applying them. So depending on your preference, you can kind of speed through those videos, or you can watch the full videos if you want that hands-on sort of walkthrough experience.